In the skies over occupied Europe, German pilots were confident. They had Messerschmitts and Focke-Wulfs, aircraft that had carved their reputation since the early days of the war. To them, the Luftwaffe ruled with unmatched authority. But then, something new appeared, a fighter with sleek lines, long-range endurance, and a sound unlike anything they had heard before. The first encounters with the American P-51 Mustang did not register as just another Allied plane. To German eyes, it looked almost alien. Reports from frontline squadrons described disbelief when the Mustang first engaged in dogfights. Pilots radioed in confusion, insisting the Allies had developed something extraordinary. German interceptors, accustomed to chasing slower bombers and outrunning short-range escorts, suddenly faced an aircraft that matched them in speed and surpassed them in agility. And most shocking of all, it could stay with the bombers deep into German territory. The Luftwaffe command initially dismissed these reports as exaggerations. Propaganda officers assured crews that the Mustang was a temporary experiment, incapable of changing the balance. But for the men in the cockpit, the truth was undeniable. The P-51 carried itself like a predator. Its range stretched further than they imagined possible, and its maneuverability made engagements a nightmare. Veterans who had once dominated the skies now felt hunted. Halfway across the Atlantic, American engineers and strategists had designed the Mustang not just to fight, but to solve the bomber crisis. Heavy losses in daylight raids were crippling morale. The Mustang's debut was meant to change that, and it did, almost overnight. From the first missions, its effect was psychological as much as physical. Luftwaffe pilots realized they could no longer rely on timing attacks against defenseless bombers. Now an escort was always waiting, ready to dive, chase, and kill. The reaction among German pilots was immediate. Diaries and squadron logs tell the same story: frustration, disbelief, and eventually, fear. The Mustang had shattered their rhythm. For the first time, the Luftwaffe felt pressure not just from bombers, but from a shadow that could strike anywhere, at any altitude. And if you're fascinated by how this story unfolds, the rivalries, the turning points, and the battles that rewrote history, make sure you hit like, subscribe, and share. This journey through the skies is just beginning. The Mustang's arrival wasn't just another chapter in the air war. It was the signal that the balance of power was shifting. And in Berlin, commanders began to sense what their frontline pilots already knew. The skies were no longer safe. The Mustang's story began far from the battlefront, in design rooms and testing fields where innovation outpaced tradition. At first, it was not even an American project. The British, desperate for a new fighter, approached North American Aviation in 1940, requesting a fast production aircraft. What emerged was the early P-51, an airframe with potential, but not yet the legend it would become. Its first versions, powered by Allison engines, performed adequately at low altitudes, but lacked strength at higher levels. Many considered it just another fighter, useful but unspectacular. Then came the breakthrough. Engineers paired the Mustang with the Rolls-Royce Merlin engine, the same power plant that gave the Spitfire its edge. The transformation was instant. Suddenly, the P-51 could climb with the best, dive faster than most, and sustain blistering speeds at altitudes where the Luftwaffe believed it still held superiority. What had once been a modest fighter became a predator. The aircraft's design revealed its brilliance in subtle details. A laminar flow wing reduced drag, allowing it to slice through the air with efficiency no German interceptor could match. Its bubble canopy granted unmatched visibility, giving pilots a panoramic view of the sky, a decisive advantage in combat. Even its fuel system was revolutionary. With external drop tanks, the Mustang could escort bombers all the way from English bases into the heart of Germany and back again, something no Allied escort had managed before. German intelligence analysts noted the change with alarm. They had underestimated the aircraft, believing its wooden propeller and initial weaknesses signaled mediocrity. But with each new encounter, the truth was undeniable. Squadrons once confident in their dominance now faced an enemy that was faster, longer-lasting, and capable of fighting on equal terms. For the Americans, the Mustang was more than a machine. It was a strategic weapon. Its range meant bomber crews no longer flew unprotected through deadly skies. Instead, waves of silver escorts circled above and ahead, ready to tear into interceptors before they even reached the formation. Losses dropped dramatically, and morale soared. Pilots who once dreaded missions deep into Germany now felt the confidence of flying under the watchful guard of Mustangs. The Luftwaffe's advantage was slipping, and they knew it. What began as a hopeful experiment had matured into a nightmare for German defenses. The P-51 was no longer just an aircraft. It was the key to reclaiming the skies. For the Luftwaffe, the Mustang's arrival was more than a nuisance. It was a strategic disaster unfolding in real time. German pilots had once flown with the confidence of hunters. Their Messerschmitt Bf-109s and Focke-Wulf 190s had owned the skies during the early years of the war. But as the P-51 appeared in greater numbers, the hunters became the hunted. Mission logs from 1943 reveal a change in tone. Where once German pilots wrote about successful ambushes and precision strikes, they now recorded frustration. Time after time, they climbed to intercept American bomber formations only to be intercepted themselves by Mustangs that had been waiting at altitude. The shock was immediate. Allied bombers were no longer lambs to the slaughter. Instead, they arrived surrounded by wolves. The Luftwaffe tried to adapt. New tactics were devised, fresh squadrons deployed, but the results remained grim. Every Mustang carried 650 caliber Browning machine guns, weapons that shredded German fighters with terrifying speed. Pilots who once relied on speed dives to escape found the Mustang hot on their tail, relentless and unyielding. For the first time, German aces began to doubt whether they could dictate the terms of combat. The psychological impact was devastating. Veteran Luftwaffe ace Adolf Galland admitted in post-war interviews that the Mustang broke the back of Germany's air defenses. He described watching formations of P-51s escorting bombers across the Reich, their numbers growing each month, their presence inescapable. German fighters scrambled in desperation, but by the time they reached the bombers, losses had already mounted. Frontline accounts tell of radio chatter filled with disbelief. Pilots reported that the new American escort not only fought with speed, but with endurance. Even after long chases, the Mustang remained on their wing, engines steady, guns ready. There was no escape, no moment of reprieve. Worse still, the Luftwaffe was running out of resources. Skilled pilots were being lost faster than they could be replaced, and fuel shortages limited training for the next generation. Facing Mustangs meant even rookies had little chance of survival. A single encounter could end in fire and smoke before they had fired a shot. By late 1943 and into 1944, the Luftwaffe's diaries tell a consistent story. The balance had shifted. German skies, once secure, now belonged to the intruder. And every time a Mustang appeared on the horizon, the message was clear. The age of German dominance was over. By 1944, the P-51 Mustang was no longer a surprise. It was the spearhead of Allied air strategy. Its presence changed not only the way battles were fought, but also the very tempo of the war in the skies. Before its arrival, daylight bombing raids had been catastrophes, with staggering losses that threatened to derail Allied planning. The Mustang reversed that spiral, providing the shield long-range bombers had always needed. Records from the 8th Air Force show the dramatic shift. In early 1943, losses in bomber crews often exceeded 20% on deep raids into Germany. Morale plummeted as missions turned into near-suicidal undertakings. But with the arrival of the Mustang, losses fell sharply. For the first time, bomber groups could push deep into enemy territory and still return in strength. The transformation was immediate and measurable. This shift forced the Luftwaffe into a position it had never faced before: defensive exhaustion. German fighters scrambled constantly, burning precious fuel, only to find themselves intercepted by swarms of Mustangs. Each engagement bled resources, each mission drained morale. By mid-1944, attrition had reached levels from which the Luftwaffe could not recover. The Mustang also opened the door to targeted strikes deeper than ever imagined. Escorting heavy bombers, it allowed raids on ball-bearing plants, oil refineries, and aircraft factories. These were not just tactical victories. They were strategic blows that starved the German war machine. Without fuel, without parts, even the best pilots could not win. First-hand accounts from Mustang pilots describe missions where they roamed freely after escort duty, hunting down German aircraft in their own airspace. The term fighter sweep became infamous. These were not defensive operations. They were aggressive hunts, tearing into the Luftwaffe at its core. The effect was devastating. Germany's best aces were drawn into battle after battle, gradually worn down by relentless waves of Mustangs. In Berlin, commanders grew desperate. New designs like the Me-262 jet fighter promised salvation, but they arrived too late and in too few numbers. The Luftwaffe could not match the Mustang's balance of range, agility, and numbers. The tide had turned, and every German officer knew it. For the Allies, the Mustang became a symbol of dominance. Its sleek silhouette overhead told bomber crews they were no longer alone. To the enemy, its roar meant another hopeless fight against a foe that could not be outrun. The Mustang was no longer just an aircraft. It was the edge that pushed the war toward Allied victory. When the war finally ended in 1945, the P-51 Mustang had earned its place as one of the most decisive aircraft of the conflict. It wasn't just another fighter. It was the machine that turned the tide of the air war, shifting the balance from German dominance to Allied control. Its story was not simply about speed or firepower, but about timing, innovation, and the will to adapt when the stakes were highest. For the Germans, the Mustang left behind scars that ran deeper than statistics. Pilots who had once carried themselves with unshakable confidence spoke years later of the dread they felt when the silver silhouette appeared above the clouds. To them, the Mustang symbolized inevitability. No matter the altitude, no matter the tactic, the outcome felt predetermined. Diaries recovered from Luftwaffe officers echo the same theme: frustration that their once-feared fighters were now prey. For the Allies, the aircraft was remembered with reverence. Bomber crews, who once faced the terror of missions without protection, now recalled the reassurance of Mustangs circling high above. Veterans wrote of the boost in morale, describing the aircraft not only as an escort, but as a guardian. In their eyes, the Mustang was more than metal and machinery. It was hope with wings. Its legacy extended beyond World War II. The Mustang continued to serve in Korea, proving that its design had staying power even in the jet age. Modified and modernized, it carried its reputation into new conflicts, still earning respect from those who flew it and fear from those who faced it. Few wartime innovations maintained relevance beyond the immediate struggle, but the Mustang's balance of range, speed, and power gave it enduring life. Historians today point to the P-51 as an example of how a single aircraft can change the trajectory of war. More than just numbers, it represented the turning of momentum, the breaking of an enemy's confidence, and the embodiment of Allied air superiority. In Berlin, the memory of its sudden arrival in 1943 remained vivid. That first shock, when German pilots stared in disbelief at an enemy they could not outrun, captured the essence of the Mustang's role. The P-51 Mustang was never invincible, but it didn't need to be. It only needed to arrive at the right moment, with the right capabilities and in the right numbers. And when it did, it rewrote history. Its legacy is not just in victories won, but in the enduring truth it proved, that speed, range, and daring could shape the fate of nations.